The date I always tell people to think of is 4000 BC, as far as this country is concerned. That's when we go from hunter-gathering to farming. And then it all happens from 4000 BC. So you get chambered tombs, you get things called causewayed enclosures, you get cursus monuments, long things that look like runways. And then they're still Stone Age at that stage. And then they go into the Bronze Age. They're making bronze. They're building round cairns. We'll be seeing some of those on the way. So they will date to about 2000 to 1500 BC. The big round cairns. If you look at them on Google, what do I mean? Google Earth, yes. I do. They look like little grey blisters on the moor. But so have a look at the moor and you'll see these big grey blisters all over the place. And those are all Bronze Age cairns. And then through into the Iron Age you get the first towns and the first states emerging before the Romans come. Up here in the Ludd Valley, you can see signs of medieval streamworks. To extract the tin, they would divert the water and rush it through the silt and do a sort of like a large-scale panning process, if you like, to remove the heavy tin. And most of the valleys on Dartmoor around the fringe have these sudden drops. You know, for example, if you go up to Cadover Bridge, you know, you see those almost cliffs on the side, you know, where you can see the whole valley has been washed away by deliberate stream working. And interestingly, where I live in Ermington, if you know where the Plantation House Hotel is in Ermington, yeah, there's a big floodplain in front running down to Fleet. Yeah. And a guy called Tony Brown at Exeter University, who's a paleo-environmentalist, was analysing layers of peat underneath about 2 metres of overburden there, of silt and sediment and rocks and all sorts of stuff. He was analysing peat underneath it and he found it was late Roman. So the streamworks that seems to have generated all this silt going down the Devon valleys seems to have started in the late Roman period. We suspect that way back in the Bronze Age that they were extracting tin on Dartmoor too. But the analysis of the copper and tin on the shipwrecks shows that it's not local. It's being imported from the continent. So it's a bit like coals to Newcastle. Here in the southwest, in Dartmoor and Cornwall, we've got some of the best tin deposits, or the best tin deposits in Europe. But we haven't actually found their streamworks yet, or any of the mines. We haven't found any direct evidence of mining. It's very much inferred. It's probable that actually the medieval stream working, which was on such a massive scale, has destroyed all the evidence of prehistoric tin working here. So you know, where you get these big sort of cut out valleys. So an enormous amount of sediment has gone into the valleys. The first environmental legislation in the world happened in England in, I think it's the 13th century, I might have to check that date, might be 14th, when Devon complained to Parliament that their harbours were silting up. Places like Plymouth and Teignmouth and others, so much sediment was coming down the River Teign and the Plym that it was clogging up the harbours. In fact, I read something yesterday that Strode, I've forgotten which Strode, of Plympton complained. And he was actually locked up in Lidford jail, you know, the big castle thing. He was locked up in the dungeon there for kicking up a big fuss about it. Okay, this place is called Cuckoo Ball. Ball is normally a hill. I think it's just the name of the hill that's given its name to this particular cairn. Now there are hundreds, maybe thousands of cairns in Devon, certainly a few hundred, and most of those are round cairns that belong to the Bronze Age. How many of you saw the White Horse Hill Kist programme on the telly? It was on recently where they found actually preserved remains in there, and that's on quite a high part of Dartmoor, and that dates to I think about 2000 BC, but it's Bronze Age. And we'll probably see some of those. You remember I was talking about those grey blisters on the moor, the round ones? Those are cairns, basically just stone barrows. In other parts of the country, when you, for example, drive across Salisbury Plain past Stonehenge, you'll see all those earthen mounds. So they're called barrows when they're made of earth. They're called cairns when they're made of stone. Loads of them on Dartmoor. But there's only a very small number of Neolithic ones. The other ones that you can see in Devon are Spinster's Rock at Drew Stainton, which is worth going to see. It's basically about, I think, three stone pillars, a bit like this, with a big capstone on the top. The best one near here is St Clear in Cornwall at Trethevy Coit, if you're ever out Bodmin Moor way. Well worth seeing. A fantastically massive capstone on top of these upright stones, and that's what we call a portal dolmen. There are different types of these in different parts of the country. So if you go to Ireland, if you go to Scotland, you'll find different designs to these things we call chambered tombs. Although I've stopped calling them chambered tombs. They do have chambers in them, and they often have burials, but I'm not sure if that's their primary function. I have a feeling, because if you look at how this one works, it may well be to be seen from the lowlands where the people are living. They also tend to be at the heads of rivers or streams, but I think it's also they are probably meeting places. And statements. Maybe they're kind of shrines as well. I wonder whether they might be used for legal, for trials and that sort of thing. But they might have a range of social functions. And people get buried in them because they're a really important place, but they're not necessarily for burial. That's my thinking. If you go to West Kennet Longbarrow near Avebury, you'll find a massive long mound with quite a sizable chamber in one end, but it's only a small proportion of the really long mound. So there's a whole thing about these being really massive monuments that are very obvious in the landscape. So not necessarily primarily for burials, although some of them do have a lot of burials in them. In some of the ones that in Gloucestershire and Wiltshire that have been analysed recently, we found there's quite a lot of violence. The skulls have been bashed in and things during the person's life, well, close to their death. So they haven't been bashed after death, you know, they're not post-mortem injuries. They are, and really quite nasty, but only a small number of people. And my feeling about that is that they may well have been for justice, these places, that they are actually executing people for misdemeanours, you know, but there you go. We always tended to think of the Neolithic, that early farming period, as being very sort of peaceful and lots of fun-loving families all living harmoniously together, but maybe not. But maybe they just have the odd little fracas and they have to bump somebody off who has murdered somebody or something. But anyway, so this is Cuckoo Ball. There's not many others, and we're going to go and see another one in a minute at Butterden Hill, which is a long cairn. This appears to be a sort of oval-shaped cairn, yeah? And I assume that actually it's not made of soil. We'd have to excavate it to see, but I assume that it's made of rocks that have all turfed over, and that originally the pile of rocks, the cairn, actually came right up here and buried this whole thing. The chamber may have been open for people to come in later and put more burials, or in many cases they actually seal the whole tomb, so the chamber is inside and you can't get in anymore. And that may be to do with sort of profanity, if you like, that they're trying to keep the spirits of the dead away. They might be actually trying to seal them away. That might be why they're putting dead people under massive mounds to keep them separate. But there's a big cult, as far as we can tell, in the Neolithic of ancestors. We tend to think of these temples and things like Stonehenge as being for the gods. We now believe that it's more likely that they are dedications to ancestors, and Stonehenge is actually based on a cremation cemetery of about 3000 BC. So the ancestors are really important to them. It's around about 3000 BC. Probably, and it's Stone Age, so no use of metal at this stage, and it's farming people. Now, we haven't got much evidence of farming actually happening on Dartmoor at this stage. We've got very little evidence of their settlements and of their fields. It looks like field building really started more in the Bronze Age, about 1,000 years later. But I suspect that from its position here and where it's looking is that it's farmlands. The people who built this actually lived in probably small hamlets, small farms down in that area down there. And if this was the tomb of the ancestors, then occasionally they would bring Grandad or whoever up here to rest. Yeah. A little bit about the Neolithic. When farming starts at 4000 BC, for the first time we get cattle, sheep, pigs and goats. The predecessors of those animals did not come from Britain. For the first time we also get barley and wheat. They are not natural to Britain. So what's sometimes called the Neolithic Revolution, which starts things like these tombs, permanent settlement, pottery, all sorts of things in the Neolithic, that appears, the technology and everything, the culture is almost imported from abroad.
Don't tell UKIP.
No, yeah. Although my own suspicion, it's actually indigenous people who are doing that. It's a cultural change. So farming actually ultimately starts in the Near East, or what we tend to call the Middle East these days. So Iraq, round to Palestine and Israel, in what we call a fertile crescent. That's where wheat and barley all starts up, and it's where sheep and goats and things. And over a period of about 4,000 years, it spreads across Europe. I think that's about a mile a year, kilometre a year. So it's not like, you know, marching immigrants going, you know, we're going to do that. It's, or even invaders, it's nothing like that. It's a gradual spread. And we've been discussing for many, many years as to whether that is just the movement of an idea of farming or whether it's actually people moving. It's a sort of mixture of both. Essentially the Neolithic is no different from what it is today, but they're actually coming to a generally forested environment across Britain. Certainly southern Britain is generally forested, and most of the clearance, we can see it quite very well now from pollen diagrams. And one of the great things about Dartmoor is because you get these peat sequences, so you can look at pollen from different dates right through time, over thousands of years, and that pollen tells you the proportions of what trees, you know, oak and alder and birch and all sorts of things, and the proportion of grasses. And it also shows you the occurrence of certain things that travel with humans, with farmers. Plantago lanceolata, which is plantain. If you ever play, when you're a kid, you flick those tops, you know, on the lawn. That's Plantago lanceolata, and they are an indicator of human agriculture. They seem to travel with it. So we see them occurring on the pollen diagrams, and you see a decline in trees and a growth of grasses. So the graphs from the pollen diagrams tell you the complete story, and we can see that's happening with Dartmoor. So well before these field systems happen. So from the Neolithic onwards.